That brings us on to the topic of transgenderism. So as you know, LGBT, you have lesbian, gay, bisexual, and then T is for transgenderism. You have biological men who claim to transition into women, calling themselves transgender women. Then you have biological women claiming to transition into men. It's called transgender men. Now quickly, let's have a look at the brief history of this before we get into the topic in depth. Since 2004, through the Gender Recognition Act, people have had the ability to change their legal gender in the UK by obtaining what's called a gender recognition certificate. Interestingly, they do not have to have undergone surgery or to be on hormones to get one, but they do need an approved medical practitioner to diagnose them as having gender dysphoria and a requirement to live in the new gender for at least 2 years. Now, you might have seen the controversy last year in Scotland where they tried to pass a bill. Essentially what they were trying to do was speed this whole process up by removing the need for diagnosing of the gender dysphoria aspect, and also to reduce the time someone has to live permanently in their gender from 2 years to 3 months. So almost like fast tracking, you could say. And for 16, 17-year-olds, it would be 6 months. So that was unsuccessful. It was vetoed by the UK government. I want to read a quote from New York Times. This is in June 2020, it's only 3 years ago. It says, in the last decade, diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is severe discomfort in one's biological sex, has exploded across the West. Now, interestingly, gender dysphoria used to be called gender identity disorder, but obviously people didn't like the disorder word and changed it to dysphoria. The quote says, between 2016-2017, the number of gender surgeries for natal females in the US quadrupled. In the UK, the rates of gender dysphoria for teenage girls are up 4,400% over the previous decade. An ailment that typically began in early childhood and overwhelmingly affected males suddenly has a new dominant demographic, teenage girls. And then, that's just laying, gives an idea of what's happening. So obviously this is really taking off. So what is the Islamic perspective? Well, first of all, in Surah Hujurat, and you might hear this verse a lot, especially in talks with non-Muslims and interfaith discussions and so on. In Surah Hujurat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. We created you from a male and female. So you always see this dhakar and untha in the Quran, male, female. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. And we made you into nations and tribes so you might get to know one another. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and that's in Surah Hujurat, that's Surah number 49, verse number 13. It tells us in Surah Al-Imran, which is chapter number 3, and verse number 36, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكْرُ كَالْأُنثَى. The male is not like the female. The male is not like the female. So it's very clear we have two genders. Okay, we have two genders, and there is a intersex. We don't want to get into that. That's a very rare exception, and that is mentioned. But generally speaking, we have the male and the female. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that Shaitan himself, Iblis, has vowed to misguide humanity, and one of the things he mentions that he will do, I will command them so they will change the creation of Allah. This is in Surah Nisa, verse number 119. Okay, chapter number 4. We also have hadith which prohibit mutilation of the human body. We're not allowed to remove body parts. Okay, any kind of mutilation of the human body is prohibited. We also know there's hadith that prohibit the imitation of the opposite gender, right? Males are supposed to be males, females are supposed to be females. There should be no blurring of the lines, let alone trying to imitate the opposite. So when we're discussing with people, they may say, just like the homosexuality issues, well, we don't believe in the Quran or the hadith. And so we can make some reasonable points of why, this is our perspective. I mean, obviously it's coming from the Quran, so that's enough for us as Muslims. But when we're talking to non-Muslims, I'm talking about here, we have to make a cogent argument. So the first thing, and the thing is here, what you find is, this is actually an easier topic to discuss because a lot of non-Muslims are also not for this. What makes the LGBT a bit confusing sometimes is that you have a lot of non-Muslims who completely reject the T, reject the transgenderism, but they accept the LGB stuff. They accept homosexuality, but not the transgender. That's just one step too far. And you get obviously some that reject all of it, but they're less. And obviously Muslims, we have an issue with all of it. So there might be people who are willing to, support, or this thing about transgenderism being not correct, but then they will accept the homosexuality issue. So this is why we had to look at both. But they make a lot of arguments, and this is surfacing more and more. Probably the strongest one is that it's scientific. It's scientifically impossible for a male to become a female. We all know, we've learnt this in biology, that females have 2 X chromosomes in their cells, and males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome. So you can manipulate the exterior, you can do surgery, you can remove body parts, you can add in bits and bobs, plastic surgery, you can put people on hormones, but you cannot change the inner cellular structure. You can't change the inner reality. And that's why people who do fully transition, have to be in hormones for the rest of their lives, right? Because essentially it's you're manipulating the outward, but the inward is still the same. So the challenge really for trans activists is to explain why a mere feeling of being male or female or both or neither makes somebody a male or female or both or neither, right? Why is the science not important? Why can we ignore the science and just go on what the person feels? Because we know that feelings are not always true. If an anorexic person feels obese, but no one looks at the anorexic person, sees they're underweight, and goes along with what they feel their reality is, that they're obese. We're not going to affirm their reality, what they think is reality. We're only going to affirm the truth, and that's the thing. We have to affirm the truth, and we're not forcing people. People can have their own opinion, but they can't force us to accept their version of reality. Okay, because we don't need people to validate Islam. For me to believe Islam is true, I don't need the rest of society to also validate and say, yep, your perception of reality is true. I believe it because it's true, and then you should also, I would say to the other side, you should also not care what other people think, because if you think it's true, right, that should be enough. Why do you need other people to validate your version? If I needed other people to validate, it shows that I don't really believe it's true myself, because I need other people to go and validate me, right? If I believe it, I believe it. I believe it's to be truth, whether people accept it or not. And so, for you to ask other people to validate, that's actually a stance of weakness. It's not coming from a stance of strength. Also, where do you stop with this? Like, you have people who, this is called transabled, people who are nothing wrong with them. Physically, they're fine, but they feel as if they're disabled. So they feel this arm doesn't belong, and people have amputated their limbs off and felt better afterwards because they feel like a disabled person in an abled person's body. So do we accept that as well? Should the NHS, be amputating limbs? Is this what we want society to be doing? And we don't go around validating everybody's feelings, because feelings can be right or wrong. We know this, that not all feelings are correct. We know that we have whisperings of shaitan, for example, right? We know that we have an ego and nafs, right? That whispers as well. So it's not always coming from a true place or the right place in the human being. So we don't validate all our feelings. And I mean, in this area, a lot of non-Muslims will actually agree with us on the dangers of the whole gender ideology. So leaving aside religion, we can just say to people, look, forget religion for a second. Okay? Forget that. Can we not just common sense? Let's just look at can we not just agree that it's common sense that women are worried about biological men who identify as women entering into their space like toilets and changing rooms? Can we not just agree that that's a very reasonable thing for them to be saying? We've seen cases where rapists have been sent to all-women prisons because they identify as women and have gone on to rape other women. So is it not just a common sense thing that a biological male should not be put into all female spaces? It's not an unreasonable request. And then also you get into issues because there's so many genders now. There's one called gender fluid, which is a person whose gender identity is not fixed. It could be male one day, female another day. They could be on another day they could be male and female, and another day they could be neither. So does that mean that the day that they feel male, they go into the male space, and if the day they feel female, they go into the female space? What about the day that they feel both, they're male and female? Which changing room do they go to? This. And can we not just again agree that it's common sense that to expose children to explicit sexual content from primary school is sexualizing them before they're even ready to understand these concepts? And so it's grossly irresponsible to do that. Can we not just also agree that to interfere with the bodies of children is not a good idea? That, especially when it leads to changes which will be irreversible mutilation, can we not just agree that that's not a good thing? And it's much better, more common sense, to explore other alternative ways of helping people, just like therapy, dealing with whatever issues that they've got, rather than jumping to irreversible removal of body parts and transitioning. Because what they, when they feel that a child is like that, they put them on puberty blockers. And puberty blockers, this is from the age of 9 to 13 to stop puberty happening, so that they don't go into the gender that they're apparently don't want to be. This leads to infertility. So one of the major side effects is that even if they come off this, it will lead to them being infertile. So, it's very, very harmful. Now, again, those promoting trans ideology will come up with studies to support that by doing this, you're actually going to help people. Again, just the same logic with same-sex parenting. Just from a purely rational, logical perspective, transitioning at this level, transitioning at this scale, has never been done, right? Historically, we have never done it like this, the way it's happening now. Therefore, obviously, there's not going to be enough long-term studies of the actual long-term impact of medically transitioning, right? Because it's just not there. You've not done it for long enough. You will only know in the near future, in years to come. So, when we look historically, we have no precedent for drastical surgical changes like what we're seeing today. And we have definitely no historical record of hormone therapy. So we don't know what is actually going to happen, what the impact of this is going to be. Again, it's a social experiment. It's an experiment. And we don't want to be part of that experiment, right? Whatever's going to happen with this is, it was already a movement of people trying to retransition, and that's growing. People who have gone through it, regretted it, and trying to alert other people not to do this. So, it's there's a lot of things that are happening. Now, another really interesting study shows that if you just leave children, if children have this confusion about their gender, but if you leave them, they actually grow out of it. So there's been studies done about this, and they've shown that there's high rates of transgender children who will eventually go on to accept their biological bodies rather than permanently identifying as transgender. Some of these studies put the rate as high as 84%. So, and this is called desistance. So it's quite high. So if you just leave kids alone, they will actually just grow out of it. So when your studies are telling you that, is it not better than stop tampering with introducing puberty blockers and all this kind of stuff? And also, like I said, there's no long-term real study we can rely on. The best that we've got is a study which was done in Sweden, and this study followed 324 sex reassigned persons for over a period of 30 years. So at least it's something. It's some sort of longer period. Now, interestingly, it found that these people, for sex reassigned transsexual individuals, when compared to a healthy control population, they said had substantially higher rates of overall mortality, death from cardiovascular disease, suicide attempts, and psychiatric hospitalizations. So this claim that by transitioning we're helping people and we're reducing suicide, this doesn't seem to hold up to when you measure it against these or that study in particular. And again, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to help people who have confusion over their gender. Like I said before, you have Muslims who engage in all sorts of things. We will have Muslims who are confused about their gender. That doesn't mean we don't help them. We do support them, but that doesn't mean supporting doesn't mean surgical intervention. Support can, and it should be, helping them deal with their anxieties, their traumas, their difficult personal issues. This is what other experts are saying. That's what we should be concentrating on. If you do that, if you take care of that, all the things which make them feel that they want to change their gender, deal with that, and that will help them a lot more to put them in a much better mental space to make much better decisions.